Hello, my name is Daniel Evans, and this is the week 4 video assignment for sports economics. Before I go into things that I noticed based on what we did in class this week, a funny economic sports story that I noticed was how after the Rams, before the AFC Championship, they tried to make sure that only Rams fans could buy tickets. So a lot of them were surprised when Rams fans bought tickets, then sold them to 49ers at higher, but not that much higher, but still higher prices, which people point out is basically just economic principles. So that was one of the many reasons that the Rams attempts to make sure 49ers fans couldn't go to the championship didn't work at all. Also, about what we talked about in class, for starters, about how athletes, like when it comes to classes and payment and like whether or not they actually get an education, it reminded me of John Oliver's video on college athletes. And a sort of funny thing I noted was how he's noted articles that mentioned how a lot of college athletes basically got easy passes in Swahili classes, and Swahili is not a language that most Americans would use because most people don't travel to the Eastern African countries that speak Swahili. So it was basically just John Oliver using that to point out how these athletes take kind of useless classes that they get easy grades in just so they can be in sports. Also, South Park had a hilarious thing about about how colleges don't pay athletes, and it was funny but also very accurate. Also, when it comes to diminishing income increases per academic degree, which is something that the homework kind of touched on, the other homework assignment for this week, I think that's kind of because the amount of basically there are a lot of fields that want a bachelor's degree over someone with not less than a bachelor's degree, but the amount of jobs that want a master's degree over a bachelor's or a PhD over a bachelor's or master's or a combination of them is much lower. So basically, with that group being much lower than the group that just wants bachelor's degree employees over those that don't have a bachelor's degree, the reasons to basically the average income of a PhD or master's graduate, like it'll be higher than someone with just a bachelor's, but not that much higher. So the ratio between the difference in a master's or PhD graduate and a bachelor's degree graduate in their income, the gap won't be nearly as big as the average bachelor's degree graduate employee over an employee without a bachelor's degree for that reason. Also, another thing the other homework assignment kind of touched on, in the last question especially, was how like people have been debating whether going to college makes you better at your job than if you didn't go to college. And I'm pretty sure we talked about this in one of the 2 classes this week. And on Bill Maher, he talked about how a lot of people, not just conservatives, but others, do talk about this, and some of them object, and some of them question this, like how Texas Tech University is a lazy river. And Bill Maher, who's a Democrat, by the way, big Democrat, he pointed out how like Texas Tech doesn't need a lazy river for its students, though that's up for debate. But he says if this is the stuff this is the stuff colleges spend our money on, then is it really improving education? Also, one thing I was thinking about was how sports can have a very disproportionate influence in society that's much bigger than just its revenue. Like Professor Rizzo talked about how sports revenue isn't that big, but one thing I've noticed the revenue is not that big, but there's a lot of indirect effects, like how during some college football games in the 1950s where a northern team would have like a few African American players and the southern team, like in their home stadium, wouldn't allow African Americans, there'd often be movement to ensure that either a lot of movement for or against, often both, for or against the African American players being allowed to play. And sometimes that leads to change, like how when I think it was Georgia wouldn't allow Michigan, I think, to to play against them because they had one African American player. So many Georgia University students wanted the game that they protested. So I think it was either the president of the University of Georgia or the governor of Georgia just had to give in. Also, so like, and they're like, and that's economic because, well, it's like the money caused from sports is like so interconnected to a bunch of things that people realize that the money you can get from a game might be more important than racist laws. Also, with both what the homework and what we talked about in class, the other homework assignment, the European Super League is, especially what Rizzo mentioned in class on Wednesday, the European Super League is one example of how sports created by poor people are becoming rich people's investments, and how a lot of things are evolving around money, just like Professor Rizzo said. But one thing in America that's basically showing how important money is in these leagues is how in the past few decades, especially in the last year, a lot of college football conferences have been reshuffling for the sake of money. Disney especially made sure ESPN did this by ensuring that Oklahoma University and Texas University would move over to the SEC from the Big 12 because ESPN has a deal to stream the SEC's college football games. So that basically means a huge amount of money for Disney if them moving over. And the Big 12 nearly collapsed, but they didn't. In fact, a lot of smaller teams from Group of 5 conferences are moving up to the Big 12 because of this. And more FCS teams are becoming Group of 5 teams, and more Group of 5 teams are becoming Power 5 teams because they say it's because of quality teams means they go up, but in reality it just means more money. Just like how, like Professor Rizzo said, there will inevitably be a playoff expansion in the college football playoffs because it means more money. Also, one second. Sorry about that. Anyways, one last thing I'd like to note is how I read about how in 2020, due to COVID, the Vanderbilt team in college football allowed a female kicker, which was one of the first times that, or if not the first, that college football had ever had a female kicker. And it just came to me that how a lot of times economic or crises that have economic meaning, ramifications, are often what causes the more progressive things to happen, like how I heavily doubt there would have been a female kicker in Vanderbilt if COVID hadn't taken out all the kickers before. And kind of unfortunately, crises in sports and probably in other fields might be the best way to speed up integration of either minorities, but in these days mostly female people, but also some minorities into sports. And that could apply for a lot of things, but there's a lot of economic reasoning behind this crisis-fueled integration, like for women in this case. Anyways, thank you for watching. This is my week 4 video submission for sports economics. Thank you and have a good day.